Yeah, that the art director, that was the very first one they did. It was just...
What are all the
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming to our very special event today. My name is Elisa Cahoy, and I am proud to serve as an Assistant Director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book. After our presentation today by Chris Ware, we are going to have a book sale and a book signing, and we welcome you to join us for that portion of the event as well. And finally, one additional reminder. After Chris Ware's presentation, we are going to have some time for questions and answers. And I will be holding a microphone along with Nicole Miyashiro, who also works for the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, and we'll come around to you, because that part of the presentation is going to be recorded, and we want your voices to be able to be heard, not just in this room, but for posterity. Okay. So now, before we begin with the main event, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of some of the people in this room. And I'm going to ask, as I announce each person's name, for them to stand, and then you can sit back down again. You don't have to stay standing. But let's save our applause until the end. First of all, we would like to thank Dean Barbara Dewey for sponsoring the Pennsylvania Center for the Book and for her support of this award in particular. We would also like to thank Associate Dean Lisa German. I know she's here. There she is, for her support and guidance as well. We would like to thank Wilson Hutton for his design assistance, and there is Will right there. He made our beautiful poster. We'd like to thank all of the faculty and staff of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, if they could all stand, including a special thank you to our outreach coordinator, Caroline Wermuth. Caroline is over there. There you go, who puts together this entire event. We would like to thank all of our Lynd Ward Prize Advisory Board members who guide and support this award from year to year. And they are Catherine Grigger, John Meyer, Scott Smith, Loanne Snavely, Sandra Stelz, and a special thank you to our director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, Stephen Herb, over there in that corner. Let's all... Now, a little bit about the history of this award. We'd like to recognize Robin Ward Savage and Nanda Wheaton Ward for the donation of the materials of their father, Lynd Ward, to Penn State University. The Lynd Ward Prize honors Mr. Ward's seminal influence on the development of the graphic novel and celebrates the gift of an extensive collection of Ward's wood engravings, original book illustrations, and other graphic art materials, all of these donated by Robin and Nanda. Between 1929 and 1937, Lynd Ward published his, I have a typo here, I said 6 groundbreaking wordless novels, but they're 6. They're not, but they are right here. And they're God's Man, Madman's Drum, Wild Pilgrimage, Prelude to a Million Years, Song Without Words, and Vertigo, all of which have been reissued by the Library of America in a 2-volume box set, and which have been donated by the Library of America to be presented as part of the Lynd Ward Prize today. This prize was established in part because of Penn State's strong interest in the art of the graphic novel. We recognize our science librarian John Meyer's interest in establishing this award, and this is the 3rd year of the award, presented annually to the best graphic novel, fiction or nonfiction, published in the previous calendar year by a living U.S. or Canadian citizen or resident. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Adam Haley, Chair of the 2013 Lynd Ward Prize Jury, who will present the award for this year.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank all of you for being here, even those of you who are not Chris Ware. The Lynd Ward Prize selection jury is composed of faculty, staff, student, and alumni representatives from around Penn State, all of whom have studied, taught, researched, bought, sold, and or loved comics and graphic novels. And I should emphasize that I put the most important verb at the end of that list. As Elisa said, I'm Adam Haley, a postdoctoral teaching fellow in the English department here, and the chair of this year's prize jury. I'd like to take a moment to introduce and thank the other members of the jury who spent months reading, discussing, and debating sometimes heatedly, countless graphic novels under consideration for the Ward Prize. Sadie Buckaloo was, during our deliberations, a senior majoring in communication arts and sciences and has since graduated. Amanda Clausen is a learning design librarian working in library learning services right here in this very building. Michael Green is a professor of humanities and medicine at Penn State College of Medicine. And Jeff Unger is a rare books cataloger working in cataloging and metadata services here in the university libraries. Though reading a year's worth... the awkward moment when it wasn't entirely clear whether applause was forthcoming. Though reading a year's worth of comics and graphic novels may sound like a fairly ideal vacation plan for many of us in this room, myself included, it is also a rather monumental time commitment, and I'd like to thank my fellow jury members for their efforts and expertise. The 2013 prize jury chose 2 honor books in addition to our winner, about which you'll of course be hearing more in a minute. These are books that were extraordinarily strong contenders for the prize, and that in any other year might well have won. The first is Heads or Tails by Lily Carré, published by Fantagraphics Books. The prize jury notes of Heads or Tails that it is many things: a paradoxically sweet and joyous gallery of melancholic tales, a quietly sad monument to exuberance and invention, an enticing museum of visual poetry. Carré's warm, clever, often surprising literary style and her rich, engaging design sense feed a series of stories that can seem deceptively childlike on first glance, but that yield stunning sophistication, depth, and sometimes darkness. The tales, the prize jury notes, are often bright and cheery visually, but they invariably demonstrate profound care, even affection, for the ephemeral nature of lives and longing. In this, perhaps, they have much in common with our winner. Carré's stories, both in isolation and as a set, manifest a profound sense of joy for the visual and storytelling craft of comics. That joy is contagious, and it is what makes Heads or Tails such a wonderful enigma of a book, quite literally full of wonders. Our second honored book is Book 1 of Theo Ellsworth's The Understanding Monster, published by Secret Acres. About The Understanding Monster, the prize jury says, if the crowded, cluttered headspace of depression and anxiety were to be mapped visually, it would probably look a lot like the labyrinthine pages of The Understanding Monster, which look not unlike the cover that you see here. Ellsworth embraces the unenviable task of trying to capture the untranslatable, unrepresentable, illegible experience of being trapped inside one's own head, and produces out of that task an endlessly captivating and rewarding piece of visual and narrative art. If this sounds dark or joyless, it shouldn't. The dream logic quest of Ellsworth's protagonist, a sort of in-brain heist plot in which the object is to regain psychological coherence and a stable sense of identity, is not only macabre but also profoundly mesmerizing, its mysteries and hurdles both dark and somehow charming. The book invites its readers to lose themselves in this pandemonium of the unconscious, but as its robotic narrator and other supporting characters escort Ellsworth's protagonist through the hazards of his own brain, so do they escort us, if not to safety or ironclad emotional security, then to something approaching understanding. Finally, the winner of the 2013 Lynd Ward Graphic Novel Prize, Chris Ware's Building Stories, published by Pantheon. First, a few brief words about Ware himself. One of the most acclaimed and influential artists in contemporary comics, Ware has accumulated a long list of awards, and I mean long, from the National Cartoonist Society's award for Best Comic Book to a seemingly endless series of Eisner and Harvey Awards. I can see him getting embarrassed here, which is part of the pleasure of this task. His graphic novel, Jimmy Corrigan, the Smartest Kid on Earth, first serialized in his long-running Acme Novelty Library, won the American Book Award and the Guardian First Book Award, honors that the back cover of Jimmy Corrigan asks the consumer to note, and I'm quoting here, are generally only bestowed upon those authors who refuse to learn how to draw. This sense of humor and playfulness tempers and animates Ware's recurring focus on the loneliness and isolation of his characters. His art invokes the aesthetics of early and mid-20th century cartooning, from Little Nemo to Peanuts and beyond, and the richness and precision of his designs are frequent objects of critical praise. In addition to his comics work, Ware has designed album and book covers, posters, a mural for Dave Eggers' literacy project 826 Valencia, and animations for Showtime's television adaptation of This American Life. Building Stories may be his most impressive work, even in the context of a career full of impressive works. It may also be as difficult to talk about as it is easy to fall in love with. If you've seen it, up here, you'll know what difficulty I'm talking about. A boxed collection of 14 pieces in disparate forms, from broadsheets and flipbooks to little golden books, and a 4-panel accordion-folded building map that resembles a board game, strangely, it's unclear whether one ought to call it a book or a box, or maybe to dodge the specifics of that question and call it something like an experience. At the very least, there seems to be a consensus that it's a noun of some sort, or maybe not. Building stories is as much in the verb to build as it is in the building noun around which most of its narratives center. Narratively, it peels back the facade of a nondescript 3-story walk-up in a tired Chicago neighborhood, exposing and empathetically deconstructing the quietly desperate, but also quietly beautiful, lives of a thin parade of nameless tenants who have come to call the building home. These lives are constellated across the 14 narrative artifacts to be unpacked and encountered in an undetermined order. In total, these pieces collapse the binary between to build and a building, process and locale, stories of a building and the building of stories. For where every edifice, every home, every life is an ad hoc assembly process of moments and memories, usually without much in the way of instructions. Though the back of the box, you'll notice, does offer, tongue-in-cheek, and I'm quoting here again, suggestions as to appropriate places to set down, forget, or completely lose any number of its contents within the walls of an average, well-appointed home. So you know how to do that if you look at the back of the box. Stories here are meant not to be told, but to be built, explored, inhabited, not merely visited or observed, but lived in. But for all its aesthetic precision and formal innovation, building stories is far from cold or unaffecting. Its experimental form, the prize jury argues, is a mode of generosity to its characters, whose struggles with the quiet humiliations and unnoticed heartbreaks of day-to-day life take on significance not because they are the stuff of heroic epic or grand tragedy, but because in the aggregate they make up the lives of people worthy of dignity and empathy. When the narrative comforts of plot, chronology, and prescribed character development disappear, we have no choice but to engage with Ware's characters empathetically, as individuals whose experiences matter, not because they are embedded moments in some larger narrative arc, but because they are moments of import to those characters. To live in these built stories is to feel deeply and generously for their inhabitants, to unpack the subtle connections between moments across a life, and to appreciate both the gentle beauty and the inestimable challenges of the mundane. The impressive power of building stories resides in the cooperation between its virtuoso experimental artistry and its dedicated humanism, out of which emerges one of the most accomplished, moving, compelling pieces of fiction in recent memory, in any format. I'm told that Chris vetoed the prospect of a gigantic novelty check, but fortunately this richly deserved prize comes with the box set of Lynd Ward's woodcut novels, so that I have something exceedingly impressive to hand him when he comes up here to talk for himself. On that note, I am incredibly, incredibly pleased to present the 2013 Lynd Ward Graphic Novel Prize to Chris Ware.
Anyway, thank you very, very much. I'm very honored by this. I'm even more honored that you would have established an award for graphic novels, because as a kid growing up drawing and reading comics, the last thing I'd ever think I would get for doing that or being interested in it would be an award, because I was mostly just got made fun of for it when I was a kid. So, but I greatly appreciate it. It's a complicated medium in which to work, and I'm heartened with each passing year that it seems to be getting the recognition that somebody who sits at a desk all day long replaying one's childhood difficulties it feels like it should get. So there's a quote actually from Vladimir Nabokov that I mentioned here. He kind of, I think, unfairly criticized James Joyce's recreation of the stream of consciousness, because he felt that Joyce was leaving out one whole part of consciousness, i.e. that he didn't use images, which is kind of nice to hear being a cartoonist. I actually disagree with Nabokov, because Joyce manages to create images with words only, which is kind of interesting. And he's also the only writer who's ever been able to do that, I think. Cartoonists do use images, and I think it's part of life. It's the way we remember the world, and it's also the way that we kind of reduce the world and kind of ruin the world in some ways too. So that's kind of the role of the cartoonist, is to take that language and turn it back around and try to make the world more interesting. So you can see some heavy lids already here, so I will My grandmother always said, when you don't know what else to do, for Christ's sake, just be gracious. So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. It's very nice of you. Sorry, I forgot you get to ask me questions.
Not off the hook yet. Thank you so much, Chris. We're
Thank
going
you.
to take some questions now. We're going to bring the lights up. And Nicole and I will come around. So if you have a question, just please stand up and one of us will come to you with the microphone. Okay? And you take, you can take that one.
Okay, as a graphics designer working within the printing department at Penn State, it was a welcome sensation to experience the smell of offset ink upon opening building stories.
It's soy-based ink. Yeah.
Smelled like it.
Yes, yes.
In an era of digital technology where readers are able to zoom in on individual panels of a graphic novel in order to more easily read them, such as the plumber's comment on the woman's life injury, how do the physical constraints of ink on paper, finished sheet size, and keeping the number of pages to multiples of 4 lend itself to the creative solutions in your storytelling?
That's a good question. I'm really impressed you wrote that out so mellifluously. You guys are all so prepared and so inadequate. Well, in a way it helps because, first of all, it imposes a little bit of a structure. If you know you have to work in multiples of 4, you start to think in multiples of 4, and that helps. Like when I did the thing for the Wired strip, I thought of it in terms of pages, but I knew that if I hadn't, I would have, I wouldn't have known when to stop necessarily. So it's very important it's almost like I don't even think about it anymore. I know when I'm drawing a strip that it's going to start either in the middle or the upper left-hand corner, and I try to structure it in such a way that this ending of it isn't necessarily given away, even though you might look at the image. And I know that the time that it takes to go from the lower part of the left page to the upper right is going to be built in to the story. And as far as the physicality of the experience goes, it's fundamental to it. I mean, we're at a point right now where the physicality of information is kind of vanishing rapidly, and the gesture for trying to remember something has gone from looking above your head to going like this to see if you have your phone with you. And that's kind of frightening in a way, I think. So, and there's, at least in my generation, there's something about the shape of the newspaper, even if it's just a blank piece of paper or the shape of a magazine, that has a peculiar kind of poetic redolence to it, I guess, or something that I'm trying to key into there. So, I don't know if it'll mean anything to the next generation. It might not at all. So I feel very old saying these things, so it just makes me feel like a tired old creep or something. So I'm not answering your question at all. It's a very thoughtful question. So. Yes, sir. Jesus, did you write your question down too?
No, this is just junk.
Okay, good.
Your work seems to reveal a real fascination with architecture, and I'm wondering if there's some way you could reveal something about your own relationship to built spaces. Maybe there's something that you might look for, perhaps, when you've had to choose a place to live or something.
Yeah, there's a moment in Tarkovsky's Solaris where, early in the story, when you know he's going to leave planet Earth. This probably isn't the answer you wanted, but and he's in a house that's by a lake, and he mentions it to a character that he built it because it reminded him of his grandfather's house or something like that, and that really struck me. I think in a lot of cases we end up trying to find places that take us back to that early point in childhood when we were forming our memories and forming our vessels for emotion, for lack of a better word. And because I know in my dreams I can feel the spaces of my grandmother's house and the house that I grew up in, and even the school that I went to. They take almost like a solid form that I can inhabit, but without necessarily the details there. Even sometimes when I'm drawing, I feel a space off to the right, almost like it's actually really right there. So I think these things somehow can actually affect our memories and affect the way that memories are stored, for lack of a better word. There are books written about this which I haven't read, which I should read, There's one called The Poetics of Space that whenever I mention it, people go, oh yeah, that's a smart book, unlike you. You know, you can't even articulate your ideas. But so there's something there. And I read an article about a year and a half ago about apparently recent neurological research points to the fact that our brains are not just a mass of neurons, but they're organized in an XYZ axis, which is kind of interesting because that's essentially what architecture is. So maybe there's a reason other than it's convenient to and simple to build things in straight lines. Maybe there's something about the way our brains are organized that compels us to build things that are shaped like this. So I don't know.
This is a simple question. I don't know if it's worth asking, but what do you think of the term graphic novel as kind of a catch-all descriptor for comics or whatever term you want to use? It seems that when I hear people talk about comics, when I read writing about comics, there's a tendency to use any word but comics.
Yeah.
And graphic novels kind of become the acceptable or preferred term. And I just wondered, and you used it several times in your talk. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that term. As someone, who grew up and was a formed artist before that term really began to circulate and become standard.
Oh, I used it because the award was for graphic novels, so I kind of felt like I should. I kind of hate the phrase actually, but I found that it more quickly describes what I do to people who would have otherwise no idea whatsoever what I do. If I say I'm a cartoonist, somebody might say, oh, that sounds like fun, and I think, well, not really. Let me explain what it is that I do, and then I say, well, I try to do comics for adults, and they're like, what do you mean by that? But then ironically, the word graphic novel it sounds like I'm a pornographer, basically, so it's a complicated term. I prefer the word comics or cartoons because it's immediately disarming, and that's one of the things I like most about comics is that they are a disarming medium. There's no skein or smoke screen of critical theory that is between the reader and the book, or at least I hope there isn't, and I don't want there to be. I've said this a gazillion times, but when I was in art school, I felt like whenever I went to a museum and looked at a painting and I didn't understand it, it was because I didn't understand the history of painting. And I think if you read a comic strip and you don't understand it, you just assume the cartoonist is an idiot. So that's a really good relationship to have with, I thought that was my water bottle, with the reader and the artist. It's endemic to the popular arts in America, but at least in the fine art world where you're still using drawn images, etc., it's one of the last art forms where that still is the case, I think. So,
Thanks.
sure.
So I'm thinking about the movement from Jimmy Corrigan to the woman in building stories, who I find I'm so drawn to. And I'm particularly drawn to the fact that you've created not just a woman character, but I'm teaching a disability studies class this semester, and you've created a character with a prosthetic limb. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that movement, why her, what does she mean to you? It's a wonderful character.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I just, I think she's a more real character than Jimmy Corrigan was, whose name I don't even like saying. Human consciousness comes in all different shapes and sizes, and there's no reason why one should be the ideal or not. And that's kind of what it's about. It's about trying to empathize with other people who aren't like you. That's why we're alive. That's the point of art. That's why we make art. There might be other people who would disagree, but I really feel like that's why we start making art, is to say, do you feel the same way that I feel? Do you understand the same things? Or to try to understand other people. So I don't think anybody's going to read the book under the misapprehension that it's a real keen insight into what it feels like to be a woman, but it might be an insight into somebody trying to understand that. So, and hopefully, I don't know. I mean, I really feel like that's what it's about, because that's really all we've got. I mean, we like to think we have clothes and houses and cars and everything, but we don't. All we end up with when it's all over our memories. So,
I want to build on that observation,
okay.
because I think it requires your special insight. She's nameless. Jimmy's got a name. And in order to be the smartest kid on earth, he better have a name and know it. But in her case, is that a generalization from your explanation here to almost anybody?
Well, it could be. There's a couple of reasons for it. Number one is that I noticed that in my dreams I never seem to have a name. Strangely, I don't know why, but I can't recall any instance in any dream that I've had. Maybe it's just my own problem. But, and on top of that, whenever you have a child, you automatically get a name. So that's kind of what it's about.
You mentioned earlier when you were talking about Facebook how getting to know people, they sort of unfold for you through various observations and stories and things that you put together. And I just wondered if that was kind of reflective in the way you designed your own characters. You were sort of talking about starting with a single strip for a cartoon somewhere, and then suddenly it became a story. And yeah, I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
That's actually entirely true. So I'm not. The novelist Zadie Smith wrote a very smart essay positing the notion that there are basically only two kinds of novelists: those who get an idea for a book and create a list of characters and go through and create their entire life stories and details of what they're like, what they look like, what they like to eat, where they went to school, how they're going to die, the buildings they live in, and fill it up with all the details, and then they sit down and they start writing. And then she said there's the other writers who sit down with a piece of paper, roll it into their typewriter, or turn on the computer and just start typing. And she said she's one of those writers, and I'm one of those writers too, because there's no way I could plan all that stuff to begin with. I feel way too self-doubting, and I'm a bad enough writer that I need to kind of get into it in a slower way and kind of understand it better. And besides, writing is thinking anyway. It's just a slightly slower kind of thinking, and I think it allows for things to happen on the page that otherwise wouldn't happen if you're just sitting staring out the window. So you can't plan everything. So does that make any sense at all? I don't know. I feel like I'm letting everybody down. I apologize. But thank you very, very much for having me here. Thanks for wasting your afternoon.